You are welcome to News Niger TV. Listen to the news headline. Federal government unveils 52-page guidelines for school reopening. In Abuja, the federal government has released a 52-page set of guidelines for the reopening of schools in the country as it continues to manage the COVID-19 pandemic. While it listed several conditions that must be met, it, however, did not give a specific date as to when schools should reopen. This was as it warns Nigerians against flouting the COVID-19 safety protocols, specifically stating that meetings by government establishments shall continue to be by virtual means, where participants are more than 4. Chairman of the Presidential Task Force (PTF) on COVID-19 and Secretary to the Government for the Federation (SGF), Mr. Boss Mustafa, who gave the charge at Monday's briefing of the task force in Nigeria in Abuja, equally urged politicians in Edo and Ondo State to be circumspect in their dealings ahead of the forthcoming governorship elections in both states. The pandemic would not go away by a wish, neither would it go away if we refuse to keep safe. All government offices shall continue to hold virtual meetings in their offices, especially where participants exceed 4 persons, and suspend all unnecessary travels for meetings. For corporate organizations, board members, etc., the reopening of the domestic flight should not be misconstrued. The PTF strongly encourages virtual meetings as well. We still urge places of worship to courteously follow the guidelines on public gatherings, and we urge members of the political class, particularly in states where elections are scheduled for September and October, to exercise utmost circumspection in their gathering for whatever reason, the SGF said. He said the level of carbon emissions in Abuja has drastically reduced following the initial lockdown imposed on the city and the current partial restrictions, which has led to fewer people driving on the roads. On reopening of school, Mustafa said the federal government would not do anything to compromise the safety of the students and pupils. He said the PTF has assessed the circumstances and has put in place necessary guidelines to be followed, while the managers of the sector have the responsibilities for drawing up the protocols and determining the state's dates. We urge Nigerians to follow closely the critical steps being taken by the Federal Ministry of Education in conjunction with other stakeholders. Further to this, the Federal Ministry of Education has released guidelines for school and learning facilities reopening after COVID-19 pandemic closure. The guidelines clearly spell out major things to consider before school and learning facilities shall reopen. The reopening process, sequencing and scheduling of safe reopening, and decision about school reopening. The Minister of State of Education will elaborate on this. The PTF recognizes the efforts of our innovators, researchers, and research institutions in working to get a solution to the COVID-19, especially its cure. However, we refrain from misleading the public into believing that a cure has been found or certified when indeed the validation process was still ongoing. This call is necessitated by the recent publications that a cure for COVID-19 has been listed by NAFDAC. The agency has debunked the claim, and we advised Nigerians to be vigilant. Also speaking, Minister of State Education Honorable Emeka Nwajuba, who did not give a specific date as to when schools would be reopened, said the guidelines contains what managers of school have to do before they can be reopened, and also what they must do to remain open. In the guidelines obtained by the Vanguard, the federal government gave conditions for the reopening of schools. Part of the guidelines stated the federal and state governments should be guided by recommendations, advice, or directives from the WHO, Federal Ministries of Health and Nigerian Centers of Disease Control for effective risk avoidance and mitigation of the effect of COVID-19. Decision making should also involve all major stakeholders, including governments at all levels, communities, and civil societies. This is to ensure that decisions and planned actions are based on comprehensive analysis, consensus, and adequate consideration for context. Also to be considered is the level of community transmission nationwide and level of compliance with the safety guidelines. A team of readiness and compliance assessors would also be dispatched to school with a checklist to determine their suitability for reopening. The federal government listed several questions that must be answered before school reopens in any part of the country. Some of the questions are: what is the level of the compliance of the public with the guidelines? There has to be evidence that this compliance can translate to the education community when school opens. How much capacity has Nigeria developed for national testing? What is the capacity to test, trace, isolate, and support the school when cases are suspected? Does Nigeria have the capacity to test all returning staffs and learners in abroad school facilities? What is the capacity of the healthcare system nationwide to promptly detect and contain an upward surge in the number of coronavirus cases if a second wave occurs? Are schools able and ready to implement infections, preventions, and control disease measures? What is the capacity of schools and learning facilities nationwide to maintain safe school operations, to mitigate risk, for example, size of classroom compared to numbers of learners, cross ventilation in classrooms, availability of water, sanitation and hygiene, amenities includes latrines, hand wash facilities with soap and water. How does the school population travel to and from school? What is the risk of using public transportation for teachers, education personnel, and learners? What are the community-related risk factors to reopening of schools for both teachers and learners, considering epidemiological factors, public health and healthcare capacities, population destiny, and adherence to social distancing and good health practice? Federal and state ministries of education should decide when to reopen after due consultations with the Presidential Task Force (PTF) on COVID-19 Federal Ministry of Health, National Center for Disease Control (CDC), and other critical stakeholders, including non-state educational providers, teachers, unions, PTAs, and school-based management committees. It is equally crucial that consultation are held and communications exchanged with parents, teachers, learners, and communities to understand and address common concerns. Decision on safe reopening should be contingent on meeting the requirements set out in these guidelines and on a case-by-case basis for each school and learning facilities. To this end, a multi-sectoral approach comprising of education, health, environment, and emergencies operation centers should use the joint assessment for safe reopening of schools and learning facilities to determine when each school should reopen, the guidelines stated. Health Minister Dr. Sagayani disclosed that about 183 or 294 COVID tests have been conducted so far, adding that the ministry is encouraging of health facilities not to reject patients but to refer them to other institutions where such risks cannot be handled at those levels. Thanks for listening to News Nigeria TV.